Jaguar rose on beauty and bold engineering, then stumbled through decades of chaos and revival. Here's how British pride kept looping. Number 1. Origins, a motorcycle sidecar company that aimed high, 1922 to 1930s. In the early 1920s, Britain's roads were filled with motorbikes, not cars, and two young men in Blackpool saw an opening. William Lyons and William Walmsley were both barely out of their teens, yet they teamed up to build something simple but smart. Sleek motorcycle sidecars with a level of polish the market just wasn't offering. They called their venture the Swallow Sidecar Company, and the name spread faster than either expected. Success nudged them beyond sidecars. Customers began asking for more ambitious projects, so the pair moved into coach-built car bodies, elegant shells fitted onto chassis, supplied by other manufacturers. These early Swallow models weren't luxury machines, but they looked more expensive than they were, which gave the brand its first real identity. Stylish British motoring that didn't intimidate buyers. By 1933, the business had outgrown its origins. The partnership shifted, Walmsley stepped away, and the company rebranded as SS Cars Limited, focusing on full automobile production rather than add-on bodies. That transformation laid the groundwork for the brand Jaguar would eventually become. The company had gone from crafting sidecars in a small workshop to designing complete cars under its own banner by the mid-1930s. Number 2. The Jaguar name and pre-war identity, 1935 to 1945. That early evolution set the stage for the company's next big shift, the arrival of the Jaguar name. In 1935, SS Cars unveiled two new saloons, the SS Jaguar 2.5 and 3.5, and the name landed with exactly the sort of presence William Lyons wanted. It suggested speed, elegance, and a sense of confidence that separated these cars from the rather modest machines of the early Swallow days. The choice worked almost immediately. Reviewers used the word Jaguar as though it had always belonged in the motoring vocabulary, and the company embraced it, building a clearer identity around grace and performance. But the outbreak of the Second World War changed everything. Production stopped, the workforce shifted to military contracts, and by the end of the conflict, the initials SS carried a meaning that no British firm wanted attached to its badge. So, in 1945, Lyons made a decisive break. The company would now be known simply as Jaguar Cars. The renaming didn't just distance the brand from unwanted associations, it sharpened its persona. From then on, Jaguar wasn't just a model line, it became a symbol of the kind of refined British motoring the post-war world was ready to celebrate. Number 3. The Golden Era under Lyons, 1948 to 1960s. With the Jaguar name now on the nose of every car, Lyons set out to prove it could live up to its promise. In 1948, he unveiled the XK120, a low-flowing sports car that looked like it had been poured rather than built. It wasn't just pretty. On a Belgian motorway, a modified XK120 was timed at over 130 miles an hour, making it the fastest production car in the world. That speed fed directly into racing. The XK line evolved into the C-Type and then the D-Type. And in the 1950s, those cars tore through Le Mans. Jaguar won the 24-hour race 5 times in that decade, beating bigger, older names and putting a British manufacturer right at the centre of global motorsport. Lyons pushed his team towards a particular blend, advanced engineering wrapped in beautiful shapes that ordinary professionals could aspire to, even if they never quite reached the showroom. In an era of rationing and grey post-war streets, these sleek green and silver cars gave Britain something glamorous to point to, a reminder that the country could still build machines the rest of the world would stare at. Number 4. Expansion and the British Motor Corporation. Merger, 1966 to 1968. But the run of freedom and success under Lyons couldn't last in the changing British car industry. By the mid-1960s, the government was pushing manufacturers to consolidate, hoping bigger groups would be more efficient and better able to compete internationally. In 1966, Jaguar agreed to merge into British Motor Holdings, a conglomerate that also included the ailing BMC. On paper, it sounded strategic. Shared resources, shared purchasing, more muscle overseas. In reality, BMH was already struggling. Its volume brands were losing money, its factories were inefficient, and within 2 years the whole structure had to be folded into an even bigger creation, British Leyland Motor Corporation, formed in 1968 with heavy government encouragement. Inside that vast new empire, Jaguar became just one division among many. Lion stayed involved, but he no longer controlled the purse strings or the production system. Budgets, parts decisions, even factory priorities were now tied to a group agenda that also had to worry about Austin, Morris, Triumph and Rover. For a company that had built its reputation on doing things its own way, that shift mattered. Customers still saw the leopard on the bonnet, but the people building the cars suddenly had far less say in how they were made. Number 5. The quality crisis of the 1970s. That loss of autonomy came with a brutal price in the 1970s. Inside British Leyland, Jaguar was no longer the favoured racing thoroughbred. It was just one troubled brand in a collapsing group, fighting for investment, tools and time on the production lines. Across Britain, car plants were hit by regular strikes, walkouts and overtime bans. Brown's Lane, Jaguar's home in Coventry, was no exception. Cars might sit half-finished, then be rushed out once work resumed. Panels didn't line up. Electrical systems misbehaved. Rust protection was patchy, sometimes non-existent. On paper, the cars still had the same straight-six engines, the same wood and leather interiors, the same graceful proportions. But owners in the UK and, crucially in America, started to notice the gap between how a Jaguar looked and how reliably it actually ran. Dealers in the US began to see cars coming back with leaking gaskets, failing electrics and corrosion far earlier than buyers expected from a premium marque. For a company that had built its name on fast, glamorous machines that could take on the world, warranty claims and quality complaints became the statistic that really mattered. Number 6. Rebirth under John Egan, 1979 to 1980s. Out of that mess stepped John Egan in 1980 with a very different mission. He found demoralized staff, angry dealers and customers who loved the idea of a Jaguar but dreaded owning one. His response wasn't a flashy new model, it was discipline. Egan went after the basics. He pushed out weak suppliers, insisted on better parts, and made sure unfinished or flawed cars simply didn't leave Brown's Lane. Inside the factories, he worked on ending the constant stoppages, rebuilding trust with unions and shop floor workers so cars could actually be built in a steady flow. As the XJ Series 3 and the XJS benefited from this cleanup, buyers began to notice the cars still looked like classic Jaguars, long bonnets, wood, leather, but they now started, ran and lasted in a way owners could rely on. In the space of a few years, Jaguar went from being a punchline for breakdown jokes to posting solid profits and winning back serious buyers. The company was viable again. Number 7. Privatization and short-lived independence, 1984 to 1989. That turnaround didn't just please customers, it caught the government's eye. In 1984, as part of Margaret Thatcher's push to sell off state-owned industries, Jaguar was floated on the stock market as an independent company. For a moment, it looked like a fairy tale comeback. The cars were desirable again, order books were healthy, and investors loved the story of a once struggling British marque now standing on its own 2 feet. Jaguar shares were heavily oversubscribed, and headlines turned the company into a poster child for free market reform. John Egan used that momentum to keep tightening up quality and expanding key export markets, especially high-margin luxury segments. On paper, everything pointed upwards. But there was a structural problem baked into the success. Compared with giants like Mercedes, BMW, and the emerging Japanese premium brands, Jaguar was tiny. It didn't have the same resources for new engines, safety tech, or emissions development. So while independence looked glamorous, it also made Jaguar highly attractive to something else the 1980s produced in abundance: big, cash-rich global car companies hunting for acquisitions. Number 8. Ford acquisition. Huge investment, mixed results, 1989 to 2008. And sure enough, a buyer was never going to be far away. In 1989, Ford moved in, not as a vulture, but as a believer. It wanted a serious European luxury brand to sit alongside its mass-market cars, and Jaguar, newly privatized, desirable but financially exposed, looked perfect. Ford poured money in. Billions went into modernizing factories like Castle Bromwich, into new stamping presses, paint shops, and proper quality systems that British Leyland could only have dreamed about. On paper, this was the dream scenario. Deep pockets backing old-school British glamour. The product plan reflected that ambition. The S-Type tried to channel retro charm. The aluminium XJ aimed to be high-tech and light. The X-Type was supposed to be the volume car that finally made Jaguar a common sight on suburban driveways. But that's where the cracks showed. The X-Type's Mondeo underpinnings became a running joke among enthusiasts. Some buyers didn't mind. Critics absolutely did. The more Ford pushed for volume, the harder it became to explain what Jaguar actually stood for anymore. Ford could buy factories, platforms, and marketing campaigns. What it couldn't easily buy was a clear identity tied to healthy profits. Number 9. American greed, narrative, corporate targets versus Jaguar culture. Behind all that new metal and factory spending, though, was a very different way of looking at Jaguar. For Ford, this was a business case. Hit aggressive sales targets, share components across brands, justify the billions going into plants and product. For the old guard in Coventry, Jaguar had always been something closer to a workshop that happened to ship cars overseas. That's where the American greed label comes from, not from cartoon villains in Detroit, but from a spreadsheet mindset colliding with a company built on hand-finished wood, leather, and low production numbers. Platform sharing, the X-Type's Mondeo roots, common switchgear, shared electronics, made sense to Ford accountants. To traditional buyers, it felt like dilution. The US market sat at the center of it all. Designs, pricing, and model strategy were increasingly shaped around what would move in American showrooms, even if it meant drifting away from what longtime Jaguar loyalists recognized. And after all that pressure and compromise, the returns still disappointed. Ford got scale and systems out of the deal. What it mostly inherited in the Jaguar column was a headache. Number 10. Ford sells Jaguar to Tata Motors, 2008. By the late 2000s, that mismatch between hopes and reality finally came to a head. In 2008, Ford agreed to sell Jaguar and Land Rover together to India's Tata Motors for around $2.3 billion. For Ford, this wasn't some grand strategic flourish. It was damage control after years of overexpansion, big bets on premium brands, and mounting losses as the global financial crisis loomed. The deal effectively drew a line under Ford's luxury car experiment. A company that had spent nearly 2 decades trying to reshape Jaguar into a modern, high-volume global player was now accepting a fraction of what it had poured into plants, product programs, and management time. Analysts at the time mostly framed it as a clear-out. Ford offloading glamorous but stubbornly unprofitable badges to stabilize its core business. The symbolism was hard to miss. One of Britain's most storied names in motoring was leaving American ownership, not for another European conglomerate, but for an industrial group based in Mumbai. For Jaguar, it was another change of flag on the factory gates. For the wider industry, it was a sign that the old map of who should own a British luxury marque no longer really applied. Number 11. Jaguar under Tata, a real turnaround, 2008 to 2015. The surprise wasn't that Ford sold Jaguar. The surprise was what happened once Tata took over. Instead of swooping in with layers of new managers and spreadsheets, Tata did almost the opposite of Ford. It backed the existing JLR leadership and let them get on with it. Money was provided, but direction stayed largely in the UK. That change in attitude unlocked a serious product push. Out came new generations of the XF and XJ on modern architectures, cars that finally looked and felt like clean-sheet Jaguars rather than reworked leftovers. The smaller XE arrived to take on the compact German saloons. And then there was the F-Type, a proper front-engine sports car that leaned directly on the E-Type's legacy without feeling like a museum piece. At the same time, demand from China and other global markets helped JLR move from perennial struggler to serious earner. For a stretch in the early 2000s, The company was throwing off the kind of cash its previous owners had always talked about, but never quite delivered. For once, the badge on the bonnet and the numbers in the accounts were finally pointing in the same direction. Number 12. The modern decline, electrification, shrinking lineup, and global pressure, 2016 to 2023. After that surge under Tata, the next decade turned much less forgiving. The first hit came from diesel. European regulators tightened rules, customers bailed after Dieselgate, and Jaguar Land Rover had a range heavily weighted toward diesel engines. Suddenly, cars that had once been the sensible choice for long-distance drivers looked like a liability. Then the global picture started to wobble. China, which had been a growth engine, became unpredictable. One year the order books looked healthy, the next they dipped sharply, and that kind of whiplash is brutal for any manufacturer trying to plan factories and new model launches. Electrification should have been the way out. The I-Pace arrived early and even won awards, but there wasn't a clear, rapid follow-through. Plans changed, an electric XJ was scrapped late in development, and rivals from Germany flooded showrooms with fresh plug-in hybrids and EVs. Meanwhile, core saloons like the XE and XF aged into the background, squeezed by SUVs on one side and newer German metal on the other. For a marque once associated with speed, its response to this new era felt painfully slow. Number 13. Jaguar's current reimagine strategy, 2021 to present. Out of that pressure came something bold, Jaguar's so-called reimagine plan. Instead of chasing BMW and Mercedes model for model, JLR's leadership basically says, fine, Jaguar will step out of that fight altogether. From 2021, the vision is sharp. Turn Jaguar into an all-electric, ultra-luxury marque, sitting closer to Bentley than to a premium German saloon. Existing cars are wound down, future combustion projects are scrapped, and the brand is effectively put into a holding pattern, while a new family of EVs is developed on a bespoke platform. It sounds dramatic because it is. Dealers watch familiar nameplates disappear. Customers see a shrinking showroom. But behind that, the idea is to build fewer cars, at much higher margins, with design and desirability doing the heavy lifting instead of volume discounts and fleet sales. It's a colossal gamble in a crowded EV market, and the timelines have already shifted more than once. But on paper at least, it's the closest Jaguar has been in decades to William Lyon's old rule. Cars that look special, feel special, and don't try to be all things to everyone. Number 14. Legacy. A loop of pride, mismanagement, and reinvention. Seen from that vantage point, Jaguar's history starts to look less like a straight line and more like a loop. You get bursts of brilliance, then years of being starved of cash, then another rescue from a new owner with a new grand idea. The early post-war years showed what British engineering could do on limited resources. The Ford period showed what happens when money isn't the problem, but direction is. Tata, by contrast, showed how much calmer things get once an impatient parent isn't yanking the wheel every quarter. All the way through, the same question keeps coming back. Is Jaguar a glamorous niche maker of beautiful cars for a few, or a proper global player rubbing shoulders with the Germans on every street corner? Every era has tried to answer that differently, and usually swung too far one way or the other. Right now, the badge is caught between heritage, regulations, and software-heavy futures. It's still chasing that sweet spot Lions aimed for, and hasn't quite caught it yet.